So in 1964, legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby did something a little strange. He was known for his dynamic, energetic drawings that brought superheroes to life with just his pencil. He was quick, he was efficient. At this point in his career, he was drawing a majority of Marvel comics, from Avengers to X-Men, from Fantastic Four to the mighty Thor. While there were plenty of other talented comics artists working at this time, no one else could match the sheer volume of comics that he was able to pump out, especially at his artistic caliber. Jack Kirby drew art good. That's what a spicy take that is. But for a couple years, during the mid to late 60s, he briefly laid down his pencil and picked up a pair of scissors, some glue, and a whole bunch of magazines, like these. And with these tools, the king of comics created Collage. Kirby cut and pasted seemingly random images together to create advanced alien technology, render the unfamiliar frontier of deep space, and bring to life a world of limitless dimensions. But why? I mean, no one was asking him to do this. In fact, a lot of his colleagues hated his collage art and wished that he would stop. They didn't print well. Heck, even some high-quality digital scans still look muddy and almost unreadable today. I mean, what is going on here in this scene? I don't know. To get to the bottom of this, we need to keep in mind the context of the mid to late 60s at Marvel Comics. Steve Ditko was dreaming up trippy, mind-bending realms in Doctor Strange. Steranko was channeling surrealism, creating ridiculous panel layouts and utilizing optical illusions to transform Nick Fury into a psychedelic science fiction espionage thriller, or a sci-fi spy thry. Yeah. My point is, Kirby's fellow artists at Marvel were pushing the boundaries of what comics art could be, while still being rooted in what readers expected. How radical and experimental could you make a comic book before people were put off and stopped buying it? Turns out, very, actually. Much more than artists may have thought at the time. But maybe Jack Kirby pushed it a little too far. Unlike Ditko and Steranko, whose trippy art has been discussed and praised for, 50 years now, Jack Kirby's weird collages don't get that same attention. And I'm sure that's more to do with the fact that there are maybe 30 total Kirby collages, compared to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Kirby drawings, including character designs for at least 2 episodes of the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show. That's true. That's a true Jack Kirby fact. I'm trying to mention Scooby-Doo in every single video because it tends to do well on my channel. Kirby's collages, though, they didn't always work as well as his drawings, but man, when they did, when everything aligned just right, you got some of the coolest, weirdest, most interesting art that Jack Kirby ever made. And just no one ever seems to talk about it. We'll get to you. So that's what we're gonna do today. Talk profoundly in depth about an extremely niche subject that you didn't know you'd care so strongly about until just now. That's what I do here. And then you wait 8 months for Netflix to make a higher quality documentary about the exact same topic. Please like and subscribe. This video was incredibly expensive to make, as you'll see, so I just want to say thanks to everyone who supports me over at patreon.com so that I can continue to make videos like this. How are you doing, you wonderful nerds? Scott here, and here's an interesting question. What is the purpose of collage? Undoubtedly, it means different things to different artists and art appreciators, but I think for me, collage brings together images, colors, forms, textures, and text that might all start out as separate individual entities, but come together to explore their overlapping, often otherwise unseen commonalities, to juxtapose visual elements in a way that highlights invisible connections between them, and to make us see people and objects in new ways outside of their original contexts. You see, before the 20th century, artistic realism was all the rage, painting scenes and objects from everyday life in a realistic way, such that a painting of a person, for instance, could really only represent that one specific person. Artists like Picasso and Braque put a spin on that, creating works that were geometrically simpler and flatter, and more general. And hey, why not take that a step further? Instead of painting everyday things, what if they used everyday things directly in their works to disrupt the conventional ideas of reality and art itself? For example, Picasso's early collages incorporated ordinary scrap cloth, wallpapers, and newspaper clippings, some of which were already quite old and worn by the time that he used them, juxtaposed against fine art materials. It's a guitar, kind of. At least it's an abstract representation of guitarness, challenging your internal sense of logic and perception over what makes a thing a thing. The balance and sometimes battle between reality, abstraction, and language. I also think collage is an incredibly accessible art form. When I made my Bob Ross video last year, I spent over $100 at least on things like oil paints, brushes, palettes, canvases, an officially licensed Bob Ross bucket, and a dark void to stand in so that I don't get paint anywhere important except my shirt, obviously. It took a lot to even get started oil painting, but with collage, all you really need is some print media, some scissors, and a glue stick. And with that, anyone can make art. I want to make art. Now, I could have just used modern day magazines to create collages. Emily steals them from eye doctor waiting rooms, which is incredibly convenient for me, but you know me, I had to make it harder and more expensive, because why wouldn't I? I wanted to channel Jack Kirby directly by using period accurate assets. So I bought a whole bunch of magazines and pulp novels from the 1960s that cost me way too much money on eBay.com. We got Life magazine, Look magazine, and the Saturday Evening Post, all from the 1960s and 70s, all mags that Jack Kirby would have used. In fact, initially Jack Kirby experimented with collage as just a relaxing hobby. He didn't plan on using his works in superhero cartoons. But as we all know, when you have a hobby, you gotta monetize it. I'm kidding, please don't do that. But nevertheless, Jack sat at his drawing board, the very same one that he used to bring an endless stream of iconic characters to life. He was assembling pieces of torn paper, playing with texture and dancing with bizarre shapes and forms. It was here that the artist wondered what was next for the comic book medium. Jack Kirby looked down at his collage and he felt inspired by the colliding ideas that created new worlds.
It added an extra dimension to comics. I wanted to see if it could materialize, and it did.
Some of Kirby's early collage work didn't exist to create any kinds of new, mysterious landscapes, but simply to hype up the vibe of something on Earth, like in Fantastic Four number 55, when Kirby renders the Himalayas in collage. Although this one could just be a photo that was colored in a certain way, it's hard to tell. But we get a better example in Journey into Mystery number 120, when Thor repairs his hammer in a forge in Pittsburgh. Kirby creates a photo collage of smoke and fire spewing from industrial equipment to amplify how awesome and powerful he believed American steel forges were. He even at least twice used collage to depict the strange and silent depths of the ocean. Once on the cover of Fantastic Four number 33, guest starring whoever this is, I don't know, and again on the inside of the comic with a piece that looks truly eerie and unfamiliar, despite coming from our own world. But for sure, the most iconic Kirby collages were his ventures into deep space and wild new realms. It's the kind of subjects that he started with back in Fantastic Four number 29, when he rendered this a fairly simple by his later standards, yet still breathtaking image of a spacecraft landing on the moon. And he continued to push the beauty and weirdness of the cosmos, especially in Thor comics.
I began to experiment. I began to throw my mind out in all different directions. I had to do a story about a living planet, a planet that was alive, a planet that was intelligent. But how do you relate to it? Why is it alive? I felt somewhere out in the universe, it becomes denser and turns liquid. And in this liquid, there was a giant multiple virus. And if it remained isolated for millions of years, it would begin to think, to evolve by itself. By the time we reached it, it might be quite superior to us, and that was ego.
Ego the Living Planet debuted at the end of Thor number 132 in what has got to be one of my favorite Jack Kirby collages. The look of Ego somehow manages to make him appear to be both a peaceful and unnerving. It's unclear in this moment if he wishes to impart on Thor harm or wisdom. It's strange and unsettling. Jack's drawings of Ego in the following issues are still very good, don't get me wrong, but they don't come close to matching the impact of this first moment with the being. We're gonna come back to this one later in more detail, I promise, but around the same time that he was detailing far-off worlds with Collage in Thor comics, Kirby traveled someplace even stranger in the pages of Fantastic Four.
I love doing collages. I made a lot of good ones. I felt like experimenting with gimmicks. I could take electronic setups and just let them run riotous. That's how the Negative Zone came about.
Fantastic Four number 51 depicts the first appearance of the Negative Zone, a mysterious alternate dimension in the Marvel Universe. It's first experienced through the lens of Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic. Now, Reed is known as being one of the most brilliant minds in the Marvel Universe, if not the most brilliant mind. So, how could Jack Kirby create an image that could precisely convey how strange and unfamiliar the Negative Zone really was? How do you create a shift in perception so strong that it rattles even Reed Richards? You already know the answer because that's what this whole video is about. Kirby made the brilliant decision to introduce this bizarre new realm through a beautifully jarring concentric collage. The details and textures are far beyond the typical comic book page, but notably, the collage feels like a complete work of art on its own. If anything is out of place here, it's Reed. To sell the uneasy feel of this realm even further, the center background of the image has optical illusion art that adds subtle motion to the frame. At this wondrous sight, Mr. Fantastic exclaims, "I've done it. I'm drifting into a world of limitless dimensions, the crossroads of infinity, the junction to everywhere." Jack Kirby saw the interstellar and interdimensional adventures of the Fantastic Four as the perfect opportunity for his experimental comic book collage art. These pages are arguably his defining works in the space. Reportedly, Jack Kirby wanted desperately to render the entire Negative Zone storyline from Fantastic Four in collage. In fact, this desire to create an entire comic book out of nothing but collage followed him throughout his career. I said we'll get to you. Just give me a minute. And unfortunately, he had to drop that artistic dream for now, simply because it was taking him too long to create each collage. Most comics he worked on that had some of his collage art really only had 1 or 2 pages of them max. Kirby just wasn't nearly as fast at making art with collage as he was with his pencil. At first blush, however, it might seem like the opposite, right? Using photos to fill in a background almost feels like a shortcut, because now you don't have to draw detailed objects and scenery by hand, meaning less work overall. But there's a difference between Will Eisner using a photograph of skyscrapers to fill in the background of a page in the story of Gerhard Schnabel, for example, and Jack Kirby perfectly exacto-knifing elements out of newspapers and intricately assembling layers upon layers of objects to create something as impressive as Reed Richards' laboratory in Fantastic Four number 39, or the debris of a destroyed spaceship floating through an endless galaxy in Thor number 161. Wow, that was a long sentence. Why didn't Google Docs stop me? As I mentioned at the start of this video, Jack Kirby was known as an incredibly fast penciler. His career and reputation was built on the unmatched volume of quality work that he could crank out. According to comics historian and author of Kirby, King of Comics, I want to say Mark Evanier? I'll make him more French than he needs to be. Why not?
Jack often drew more than 3 pages a day. During the 1963 to 1967 period, he often did 5 or 6 a day.
Although, to be fair, Kirby wasn't working a regular Dolly Parton 9-to-5 job. Evanier reports that before he even attempted collage art, he was already putting in 80-hour work weeks at his drawing table. It is a massive understatement to say that Jack Kirby drew a lot for Marvel, juggling handfuls of titles every year. And then, in what non-existent spare time that he did have, he attempted collage art. You know that slowed him down. No way was he ever going to create a full cover-to-cover collage comic under those conditions. Though it's unclear if readers of these Marvel superhero comics would have been too keen on reading a story like that in the first place. According to an issue of the Jack Kirby Collector, a publication dedicated entirely to the life and works of the King of Comics, most fans seem to hold the position that Kirby's collage art is interesting, sure, but I don't know, why didn't he just draw the stuff that he did, you know? And that attitude was seen not only in fans, but in folks at Marvel as well, like inker Joe Sinnott, who worked on these comics firsthand with Kirby.
I never cared for those collage pages because I thought they were a visual detraction from the story, and they didn't print very well either. I always felt they'd have looked better if Jack had just drawn it.
But I don't think that's true. Jack Kirby often used these collages to show off worlds and spaces that were so abstract and undefinable that he couldn't possibly be able to draw them by hand, at least not entirely. Unfortunately, Sinnott's remarks were just a small taste of Jack's diminishing support at Marvel Comics that would eventually lead him to abandon ship entirely and take his drawing board somewhere else. Something you can observe about Jack's penciling work during this time is how he kind of stopped trying so hard. He was unhappy at Marvel. In 1969, the same year we went to the moon,
We went to the moon in 1969.
not important, Jack Kirby moved out west. He was having issues back at Marvel. Marvel Comics were huge, and a lot of that attention that the company was getting highlighted, well, not Jack Kirby or really any other artists at Marvel, but it highlighted Stan Lee, who was viewed as the sole genius behind the company's success. Artists like Jack Kirby were seen only as scribes who helped bring Stan's ideas to life.
The brains and the creativity of one man lie behind all these characters and more.
Thankfully, it's become more and more common knowledge these days that the reality was the opposite. Kirby plotted and drew the comics while Stan just wrote the dialogue, but Stan was the editor. He did everything he could to put his face out there in the public eye. He was charming and charismatic. Jack Kirby was anything but charming. He was curt and grumpy and grew increasingly frustrated with Marvel Comics. And it showed in his work. Artist Joe Sinnott, remember him from a couple minutes ago, frequently inked Kirby's pencils for their work on Fantastic Four. That was a good time. He broke down one of their later issues together in Fantastic Four number 102, and it's insightful, to say the least.
There's almost no backgrounds on this page. There are no full figure shots except on panel 5. These are not good layouts from Jack. I noticed it at the time, too. I inked this page very closely to the way Jack had penciled it, very crisply. His pencils were still tight, but there's no spirit here. He did some nice art after that, but he was winding down. He wasn't putting as much into the art after that.
And the thing is, it's not hard to understand why Kirby was losing enthusiasm working for Marvel, especially because the new contract that he was expected to sign in 1970 said that not only would wages not increase, but also Marvel could just fire him without warning whenever they felt like it. If only there was a way for an organized group of workers to unite and have a collective voice in their job that would seek out economic and workplace justice, demand higher pay, improved work hours, and better contracts than what Jack Kirby was dealt. But something like that sounds cool and good, so obviously it didn't exist. But the thing that continued to eat at him was the lack of recognition for his work. Around this time, he had moved out to California, as I mentioned, to try and make it in Hollywood, hoping that some head of a production studio somewhere might have grown up on the Marvel comics that he drew and would recognize him as a valuable talent in the film industry. Yeah, after comics, after collage art, Kirby was searching for even more new creative outlets and believed film was the next thing that would light that fire. Jack Kirby was always searching, always hungry for the next creative venture. Not that the move helped much for his collage art. According to Evanier, Kirby would lament,
"All I can find around here are knitting magazines. You can't make a good spaceship out of yarn. It's clobbering time. This is like back on Yancey Street. I'm Jack Kirby."
Of course, what he was able to find out in California was Carmine Infantino, a comic book artist who was recently made the new head of DC Comics. Infantino begged Kirby to come work with him, and with the unfair dealings at Marvel and bad blood with Stan Lee still fresh, Kirby shattered the comic book universes that he helped create. And he changed companies to create some of his most wild and creative art in his career, always pushing the boundaries of what his art could be. It was here at DC Comics that Jack Kirby kept embracing his experiments with collage through Jimmy's. Look, barely any of you watched my last video about Jimmy Olsen comics, so I have to continue to show off my collection or else the curse will never be lifted. Jack Kirby created more collage art in a shorter period of time here than he ever did working at Marvel, and they were his trippiest rides yet. He took over the book with issue number 133, and by the following issue, Superman's ex-pal, the new Jimmy Olsen, number 134, DC, you gotta shorten that, buds. Jimmy and crew travel along a strange and winding road filled with obstacles called the Zoomway. On the path, they encounter this, and of course, you know they encountered this. 3 collages back to back to back, each feeling more distinct and out of place than the last one. There's a real human man's big face just screaming at them right here. I wonder what he's saying. Like and subscribe! Oh, Jack Kirby. What a visionary. Always ahead of his time. It wasn't just in the pages of Jimmy's that Jack Kirby utilized his collage art. You see, Jack Kirby pumped excitement and energy into DC's existing cast of characters, sure, but where he began to really shine was through the new characters that he brought forth at the publisher. Under their umbrella, Jack Kirby launched 3 series: The Forever People, Mr. Miracle, and The New Gods, all of which were strung together into a massive, connected narrative. Jack Kirby's Fourth World. What were the first 3 worlds? I don't know. Stop asking me. That's not a joke, by the way. Nobody knows why Jack Kirby called it Fourth World, including himself. He was asked in later years, but said he forgot, which I find profoundly charming and relatable. Either way, Fourth World was an ambitious story for Kirby to tackle, as he had never before had so much freedom to write and draw whatever he wanted. And with this freedom, he went big, with challenging, high-concept cosmic ideas that didn't always go over well with readers, but nevertheless, they made an impressive mark on comics history. Kirby incorporated his collage art in the Fourth World narrative, with collage often emphasizing how otherworldly these characters and settings were. Orion of the New Gods floats across the cover's photo collage, prominent behind him. Mantis is an imposing figure larger than the city below him. Metron, sitting in a sprawling, psychedelic plane of existence, as a tale larger than the universe itself is about to unfold. While these might not be as impressive as Kirby's other collage works, I mean, obviously it's up to your interpretation, these covers continued to provide him an outlet for them. At least for a bit. I've been recording for 2 hours. I had to take a break because I was so sweaty. It's okay for my head to be a little shiny, but I felt like I was getting to the point where I looked like a disco ball. So something that you may have noticed throughout this video is that there seems to be massive clarity differences between each collage, especially when I show scans of them that are available through digital comics apps like Comixology or Marvel Unlimited, versus the prints of them found in the pages of the original comics. Almost all of the time, the digital versions of the collages look better and clearer. Take a look once again at Ego's first appearance in Thor number 132. Notice the textures that surround the face of the living planet. Firstly, there are shapes that look like big metal bolts, all perfectly the same shape and size. In fact, this entire layer is all one big hexagon. Is Ego partly mechanical? Or, since he's a planet, are there beings living on him creating these structures? His outer edges seem to be made of rocks, maybe, but then near the top you see a mass that looks like something organic. An exposed brain, perhaps? Around him you see these ovals filled with dots that sort of look like cells under a microscope, continuing to imply that Ego is truly a living organism. But are these even parts of Ego? I assumed so, because they were all painted the same color. However, as we drift further from the center of the image, it's hard to tell where Ego stops and the rest of the universe begins. The textures and shapes all play off each other in a delicate dance that makes this an unforgettable, awe-inspiring moment. At least in the digital version of this comic. The print version looks like this. It's simply too dark. We lose that dynamic range that makes these textures come to life. The bolts barely show up. We've almost entirely lost that rocky outer edge, and this part here that sort of looks like a suction cuppy tendril extending from Ego out into the universe is just a dark blob now. Now, all right, obviously the physical comic books don't have time on their side. The pages have yellowed, the ink has faded, and in their current state, they're just not a great representation of how they looked when they were initially printed. Comic covers, however, were usually printed in higher quality and on better paper because, it was the thing that would hopefully get a prospective reader's attention. So something like Jimmy Olsen number 138 has a cover collage that's rendered in nearly identical detail to the digital version. It's really nice, actually. But at least nowadays we can appreciate Kirby's collages in greater detail, thanks to digital versions of these comic books. Although, even then, the difference doesn't always matter that much. Take Thor number 131, for example. Here, Kirby joined together visuals to create a high-tech celestial technology out of images that appear to have originally been things like satellites, radio towers, and maybe some fabric from a fashion magazine. Again, even with this high-quality scan, it's really hard to tell what's going on here. I can only imagine how illegible it must have been on the original print version. I tried Googling to see if someone had uploaded a photo of the original print online, but I couldn't find anything. I did, however, find a photo of Kirby's original artboard of this image, and yeah, right off the bat, I see the problem here, bud. It's way too dark. There's almost no highlights in this collage. It's all shadows and midtones, which, yes, does create an interesting dark atmosphere, but I can't really make heads or tails about what this scene depicts. That's not super surprising, though. According to Evanier,
I believe that in most cases, Jack did the collage, then later decided how to work it into the story. He usually did not plan them. He'd leaf through magazines in his sparse spare time and cut out shapes that were of interest to him. When he felt he had enough, he'd paste them into a collage. Some involved some drawing on Jack's part, but most were just built through instinct.
Yeah, this image definitely feels like Kirby whipped it up in advance and then just pasted it into his story without much planning, but at the very least, you get the general vibe that something impressive is happening in this moment with alien technology beyond our comprehension. And yeah, that's probably all he was really going for. Oh, also, here's a weird thing that happened to me. When I was reading through the collage pages in Jimmy Olsen number 134, the caption says the following line: "Without warning, Jimmy Olsen and the Newsboy Legion find their whiz-wagon," that's what it's called, shut up, "careening madly through a nightmare of kaleidoscopic form and color." Form and color. That's a bit odd considering this page is rendered entirely in black and white in the digital version that I first read it on. In fact, the only bit of color on the entire page is the caption box itself, but whatever. I guess we're just supposed to imagine a vibrant, aggressive colors attacking the senses of Jimmy and pals, and that's fine. Except, then I found these images online. These, I believe, are what Kirby intended the collages to look like, and holy cow, they are spectacular in color, absolutely bizarre and intricate and just beyond stunning. I thought as I viewed these images that this must have been how they were originally printed. Maybe the digital versions of this comic chose to publish these collages in black and white for whatever reason, but color versions obviously exist, and they must be in the first print of the comic. So I went to that website that I really should be banned from for my own health, and I purchased the original copy of Superman's X-Pal, the new Jimmy Olsen number 134. And as I flipped through the pages, yeah, they're still in black and white. So once again, I guess the images I found online are more photos from Jack Kirby's original artboards, which is still, really cool, but I wish the colored versions of these made it into this print. But hey, that was the comics industry in 1970. Comic books were 15 cents and they were printed on the cheapest paper with the cheapest presses. They weren't making a lot of money for retailers either. Newsstands were going out of business left and right, and other stores that once sold comics stopped carrying them altogether in favor of literally anything else that could turn a better profit. The boom of the comic book industry was declining, and the fear among those working in it was that within a decade or two, comic books would die out. But Jack Kirby turned these worries into motivation and innovation. He believed he knew the way to save the comic book industry. According to Evanier, who was working directly with Kirby at DC Comics at this time,
Kirby's ideas mostly involved upgrading the format. Bigger comics on better paper with better printing, full color, glossy paper, photo features, name authors, ads, columns, and lots of comic book stories aimed at a more adult audience. He especially wanted to do fumetti.
You can see how he was probably inspired by the magazines that he was constantly flipping through to get his collage art when he came up with this idea. Oh, and in case you don't know, fumetti is basically, think of a comic book, but instead of panels with sequential drawings that represent a story, it would be panels with sequential photographs that represent a story. And sometimes Kirby would incorporate more of his collage art into it. Fumetti wasn't really popular in America at the time, so it would be a gamble to see if American audiences would even go for a comic like that. But, if we've learned anything about Jack Kirby, he was always wanting to find new avenues of artistic storytelling, challenging the medium beyond its conventions. More than anything, Jack wanted to be an editor, helping bring together talented folks to craft groundbreaking magazines that he thought genuinely would save comics. DC Comics was in a bit of a bind here. They just hired one of the most legendary Marvel comic artists to their company, specifically for his unique vision. So they didn't want to say no to him, but everything he was proposing sounded really expensive, especially because he wasn't pitching one comic, he was pitching a whole line of full color magazine publications written by big name writers. So at first they said, yeah, it sounds like a rad idea, Jack, let's do it, whatever you need, baby. But then that mentality slowly started devolving into, maybe talking about adult topics is a bit too risky. We really should appeal to the widest audience possible, don't you think? Oh, and I know that you wanted to do all these photo shoots for that fumetti style that you were talking about, but we can't afford to do that for the entirety of every issue. Could you mix in maybe like some photos with the rest of just like your drawings? Also, would it be a big deal if, because I know that you wanted these to be full color magazines, it's just that it's so much cheaper for us to print in black and white. You understand. Also, hate to bring this up, Jack, but we spent a lot of money getting you here, Jack, and we can't afford more big name writers, Jack. So do you think you could write everything, Jack? Thanks. We're in agreement here. Naturally, Kirby protested. If they weren't gonna do it right, they shouldn't do it at all. So DC Comics listened, and ignored Jack completely to fully screw up his entire concept until we got this. Yeah, so this is Jack Kirby's Spirit World, a collected hardcover reprint from 2012, I think, which is probably as much love as this book has ever gotten. There are 2 issues of the magazine inside of here, which, fun fact, is one more issue than was ever actually printed back in 1971. The first and only issue to make it to print back then was cobbled together by Kirby and his aides in just 3 weeks, and you can see everywhere they cut corners on this thing. The entire magazine is printed in a hazy blue, but I think originally it was more like a hazy purple, if that makes a difference. It doesn't. Yeah, it is far from the full color that Kirby wanted, making it somehow worse than the much cheaper to print superhero comics they'd been doing for decades. Batman had more color than these magazines. Spirit World is nothing. It's not even regarded as a cult classic of Kirby's art, and that's honestly disappointing. Jack Kirby, over nearly a decade, kept pursuing this idea of creating an entire comic magazine out of nothing but collage, and to my knowledge, this is as close as he ever came. But it's still not it. The collage and fumetti ideas are present, sure, but it's far from the whole book. Most of it is still Jack Kirby's penciling, which is standard Kirby fare at this point. Which is to say, you know, it's really good. It's just not anything new for him. The fumetti elements are okay. I've never been a huge fan of the fumetti style, but for only 3 weeks of work, it could have been much worse. It's mostly seen in a story called The Children of the Flaming Wheel, a 3-page story that's more like poetry than an actual narrative. I have no idea what's happening in it, but it seems like it's trying to be more spiritual than literal, especially with how the main character is dressed and put on top of some psychedelic background art. And again, for only a couple weeks of work, the costuming on her is decent, but the Astro Seekers, they need some work. Why are they wearing t-shirts and blue jeans under their capes and weird helmets? There is some interesting imagery in here, and you can see Jack Kirby incorporating highly textured collage art to make wherever this is look unique and otherworldly. As I said, this magazine features the most Kirby collages of any singular issue of anything. The magazine opens with a full page and then a double page collage spread back to back with a lot of imagery meant to be seen as dark and dire to grab the reader's attention. The first story is about a woman who has a vision of the JFK assassination before it happens and tries but fails to warn people. The story ends by addressing the reader directly and asking if some sort of psychic human network really exists and how many of us were truly involved in what happened on that day because our minds are connected or whatever. Look, I wasn't even born yet, Jack. You can't pin JFK on me. But apparently that's what this collage was meant to represent. You can see this one isn't as intricate as the earlier ones he did for Marvel and DC. It mostly utilizes bigger cutouts and a handful of images, which is, totally fine, but I don't know, it's just not speaking to me as much. Probably because it leans very patriotic, and that ain't me. I think the most iconic collage from this magazine comes from a story about Nostradamus, that one guy from the 1500s who wrote a lot of things about the future that were just vague enough that anyone could interpret them to mean anything. Kirby wanted to visualize what he believed one of Nostradamus's visions of the future may have looked like by rendering it in collage. It's a neat idea. I'd try to describe this one in detail, but I don't want to be the first person to make comic books political. This magazine never saw its second issue to print back in 1971 because DC canceled it almost immediately, too quickly. In fact, for that decision to be based on any actual sales figures, not that that would matter because nobody bought the first issue anyway. There's a lot of reasons why that may have been, right? The price for the quality seemed like a bad deal for one, but you know what probably hurt its sales the worst? Was that a lot of these magazines weren't even distributed in the first place. You see, DC had such little faith in this project that they didn't even want to slap their name on it. They published it under the name Hampshire Distributors. Why? Why? I don't know. They really seem dead out to kill this project with unprecedented fervor. So when these magazines were printed and delivered to distributor warehouses, the distributors had absolutely no idea what they were or what to do with them. So in a lot of areas, they simply didn't give them to vendors, meaning tons of them just sat in a warehouse, never to be sold. Jack Kirby's interest in collage didn't whimper out with the failed project of Spirit World, however. I don't think he ever created a comic from start to finish out of collage like he dreamed of doing, but at the very least, he was able to achieve high-quality, full-color prints of his works in the 80s. This double-page spread from Captain Victory in the Galactic Ranger Special #1 from 1983 captures so much 80s deep space sci-fi vibes that I swear I've seen it before, even though I definitely haven't. And this truly stunning collage from The Hunger Dogs might be his best work. Kirby's pencil art was known for imbuing still images with powerful momentum, as if the characters really are alive on the page. When it came to his collage art, however, most of what he made felt relatively calm and still in comparison. Characters mostly just drifted through these worlds. But here, Kirby finally channeled the energy that made his pencil work so outstanding and successfully brought that dynamism to his collage work. There's motion, there's a story, there's, ironically, a liveliness to a scene about a planet dying. And this planet has what looks to be a series of islands that's shaped like a doggy paw print. Was Scooby-Doo behind the destruction of this world? I don't know, but I do know that the same year this comic came out, Scooby unleashed the souls of 13 demonic ghosts upon the universe. So who's to say, really?
Did it work? Did you subscribe yet? I mentioned Scooby-Doo again.
It is impossible to put into words how much I enjoy this collage. And that's kind of the thing, right? These collages create feelings more than anything. And credit where credit is due, regardless of how Spirit World was treated at the time by DC Comics or how little of a splash it made in the industry, I think its opening pages highlight the key to Kirby's collage art. Why did he keep coming back to this medium time and time again? Why didn't he, as his fans and fellow artists at the time insisted, just draw these images with his trusty pencil? Because Kirby believed it wasn't vital to see precisely what was going on in a scene. He was after something a little less tangible, something that instantly hits at your core through familiar icons and strange forms before you even know what you're looking at. As Spirit World put it, it is not what you see, it is what you suddenly know. Jack Kirby was one of the most talented comics artists who ever lived. His style defined an era of comic book art, but even he engaged in a different, unfamiliar, experimental art form that slowed him down, that annoyed his colleagues, and often failed to make a good impression with the readers. And it didn't always translate well to the printed page. But he did it solely because it challenged and inspired him. Jack was the kind of artist who couldn't just do the same thing over and over again indefinitely. He needed new avenues and creative outlets to explore the uncharted frontiers of what storytelling could be. And even though the thing he'll always be remembered for are his dynamic splash pages of energetic comic art, seeing him try his hand at something totally new and original resonates a lot with me, especially these days, as a fellow okay, so I'm trying really hard to refer to more things as art this year instead of content. Content feels like something that is meant to be marketed and consumed in a cold, uncaring economic system. Art, however, if it feels better, like you're giving more credit to the creative minds who are making interesting things that we experience and appreciate and think a lot about, including YouTube videos, including my own YouTube videos, I guess, which is just, it's really difficult to even say. I don't feel like I'm an artist, you know, but I am. I am an artist. Why was that so hard to say? No content, only art. And much like Jack Kirby, I know what it's like to be known for making one type of content while also feeling the itch to try something new, even if it doesn't always prove successful. Maybe you can relate to that feeling too. You know, it's kind of funny, since these collages that Kirby made didn't come from his pencil, they aren't really that valuable to a lot of fans and collectors. Most readers, as I've been reiterating, usually thought like, oh yeah, that's interesting, but I don't know, could have just drawn something, could have just stuck with what he was good at. But I admire Kirby for never feeling that pressure to stop experimenting, never letting those voices get to him. Instead, he threw in his own thesis right in the pages of his comics. When Mr. Fantastic saw Jack's art and described it as a world of limitless dimensions, the crossroads of infinity and the junction to everywhere, he was describing art. Jack was describing art and what art meant to him. You know, I wrote and rewrote this entire section of the concluding section of this video, maybe like 4 or 5 times, trying to put into words everything that has coursed through my brain while researching this topic. Pages and pages of disconnected thoughts and messages that I was taking away from all of this and that I wanted to convey to you all, but I couldn't figure out how to bring it all home through writing. And that's when I thought, well, then just stop writing. Try something new. It is both Jack Kirby's birthday this week and also my birthday this week. Different days, but very close together, and I can't speak for Jack, but a very good birthday present for me would be if you supported my videos on Patreon. I put an extended version of this video up there just for patrons where I compare and contrast 3 different prints of the same collage. It's very chaotic. Also, as I mentioned a lot throughout this video, it did cost me quite a bit of money to get all the comic books and magazines. It added up real quick, but I do think they improved the video greatly. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Amanda Trisdale, Christopher Lang, De Cassowary, Donna Bark, Edwin Latour, Eric Ketchum, Eric DeTora Pato, Everett Parrott, Jonathan and Megan Pearson, Jonathan Lanowski, and the rest of the wonderful nerds who keep this channel going over at patreon.com/NerdSync. Link in the description. If you want to watch me break down even more comic book art, here's a small playlist of me doing exactly that, starting with the question, why did Steve Ditko draw hands that way? Or here's another video, I don't know what it is, but I bet you'll like it. Once again, my name is Scott, reminding you to keep making great art. See ya.